After my FILS funeral, my wife inherited $379 and kicked me out. Karma struck fast. You won't believe what happened the day after my father-in-law's funeral. My wife inherited $379 million and kicked me out. But you know what? Karma came faster than I expected. I thought I was done, but it turns out, she was the one who ended up with nothing. Keep watching to see how this shocking twist unfolds, and how I ended up winning everything. The air in the house felt different today. Like it had somehow thickened, become charged with something I couldn't quite place. The moment I walked in, it hit me an unsettling silence that wasn't there before. I stood in the living room, trying to gather my bearings, my eyes scanning the space that had once felt like home. This house, this life, everything we'd built over the last 14 years gone in a heartbeat. Catherine was at the marble counter, swirling her glass of wine like she hadn't just dropped a bomb on me. She looked the same, elegant, poised, a picture of calm, but there was something cold in her eyes, something calculating. I had seen that look before, but never like this. I want a divorce, she said, her voice so steady, so casual, like she was placing an order at a restaurant. My mind didn't register the words at first. I mean, how could it? This was Catherine, my wife, my partner, the woman I had stood by, supported, loved without hesitation. What are you talking about? I said, trying to make sense of it, trying to find the words that could bring her back from this madness. But nothing came. Her eyes flickered, and that's when I saw it. She wasn't playing games. This wasn't some twisted joke. No. She was serious. We just buried your father, I said, my voice rising with a mix of confusion and disbelief. Shouldn't we be focusing on moving forward together? I searched her face for any sign of hesitation, but there was nothing. No flicker of doubt, no remorse. Just a smirk that made my stomach turn. No, Matthew, she sighed, a heavy, almost condescending sound. I've been thinking about this for a while. And now, I don't need you anymore. The words hit me harder than I expected. I don't need you anymore. After everything. After 14 years of building a life together, of supporting her through everything, through the ups and the downs, this was how it ended. She didn't need me. My chest tightened as I forced myself to breathe. I should have felt anger, right? Betrayal. But instead, I just felt numb. Like she had already stripped the emotion out of me with those words. Okay, I said, barely above a whisper, my voice steady but hollow. I'll sign the papers. She raised an eyebrow. I could see the surprise in her eyes. She had expected me to fight back. Beg, plead, maybe shout. But instead, I just accepted it. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to fight for. She was already gone, and I could see it in her eyes. She thought she had won. She thought that everything she ever wanted was finally within her grasp. All those years of complaining about her father, about how he controlled her life, how he didn't give her the freedom she deserved, all of it, was about to be swept away with a check that would make her untouchable. And I couldn't help but wonder if she even knew the cost of all this. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. This wasn't some sudden whim, some emotional outburst brought on by grief. No. This was a decision. A calculated one. And I had a feeling it was going to blow up in her face. As I picked up the pen and signed the divorce papers, I couldn't help but feel almost a little amused. Not because this was funny, but because I knew something she didn't. Catherine had always been so sure of herself, so convinced that she could win any battle. But this time, she had overlooked one important detail. Edward Sinclair wasn't just any man. He was ruthless, brilliant, and he never did anything without a purpose. And I had a feeling that even in death, he had one last card to play. Catherine thought she had won the jackpot, but she hadn't read the fine print. She was so wrapped up in her victory that she didn't even realize she was about to lose it all. I slid the papers back toward her, my hand still lingering on the pen, just to make sure she knew I wasn't backing down. Just remember, Cat, don't regret this later, I said, almost as an afterthought. But I could see the doubt flicker across her face. She wasn't ready for what was coming. And that's when I did something she didn't expect. I laughed. A low, knowing chuckle that had nothing to do with humor, but everything to do with the realization that she was about to find out just how wrong she was. Catherine stood there, her face tight, eyes narrowing, but she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I could see it. I could feel it in the air between us. She thought she had won. She thought she had the upper hand. But I knew better. I was done. I wasn't angry. I wasn't devastated. I wasn't even surprised. I was free. As I walked out of the house, my footsteps echoing on the marble floors, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Catherine was already gone. She just didn't know it yet. She thought she had everything she needed. But she was about to learn the hard way that money isn't everything. And as for me, I was about to find out what freedom really felt like. I didn't expect her to actually follow through. Sure, there were moments before, little cracks in the facade, moments where I wondered if this day would come. But I never really thought it would. Not like this. Not so coldly. The house, the life we built, my hands, my sweat, every sacrifice I made to make her comfortable was all disappearing with her words. I want a divorce. That wasn't something I'd heard in passing. That wasn't something we could fix. No, it was final. It hit me like a truck, but instead of breaking down in tears, something inside me just closed. I kept my cool, like I always did, even when my world was cracking open in front of me. I took the papers and signed them without thinking twice. She wasn't going to change her mind. She wasn't going to back down. I knew this. What did I have left to fight for? Not her, not anymore. As soon as I signed those papers, something inside me let go. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was exhaustion. But I knew that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to. It wasn't just the divorce. It was the way she looked at me like I was some stepping stone. Some outdated accessory that was no longer needed now that she had her father's fortune to lean on. But she didn't know what came with that money. She didn't know the conditions, the rules, the consequences. I knew Edward Sinclair. I had spent enough time around him to know that he wasn't just going to hand over that much money, without strings attached. He was ruthless. He was calculating. And he certainly didn't want Catherine getting her hands on it without earning it. I had spent enough years watching Catherine whine about her father, calling him a miser, a control freak. But now that he was gone, she was celebrating like it was a lottery win. I could see it in her eyes as she took the papers from me. She thought she had won. She thought the money was hers, and that was the end of it. But I knew better. I knew exactly what was going to happen. I didn't have all the details. Not yet. But I knew she was in for a rude awakening. There was no way she could have read that will, and understood what was really coming for her. I couldn't help but laugh as I handed her the papers, the realization starting to settle into my bones. I laughed because I was done. Done trying to salvage what was already dead. Done with her manipulation, her games, her demands. I handed her the pen, and with a quiet, almost sardonic smile, I added, "Just remember, Kat, don't regret this later." The doubt flickered across her face. She didn't expect that. She was looking for resistance, anger, pleading. Instead, she saw indifference. She didn't know what to make of it, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something in her eyes, uncertainty. And I relished it. It was the first time I'd seen her squirm. The first time she wasn't in control. I wasn't angry at her. No, that would have been too easy. I was just tired of the lies. Tired of the charade. So, I turned and walked out of the house, the one I had built with my own hands. I didn't look back. I left her there, standing in that marble-floored kitchen, believing she had won. She thought she had it all figured out. She thought she could walk away from me, take the money, and never have to deal with me again. What she didn't realize was that she was about to lose everything. I wasn't going to be there to pick up the pieces this time. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about revenge. It was about me finally standing up for myself. I had given her everything. I had worked myself to the bone, built a life for her, for us. And she thought she could just throw me away because she thought she could handle everything on her own. She didn't know the first thing about how the real world worked. The first few days were calm. Too calm. I was numb. I'd been living in this house, in this life, for so long that I hadn't fully realized how much of it had been a lie. Catherine's betrayal wasn't sudden. It was something that had been coming for years, slowly eating away at everything we'd built together. And when she finally did it, it was almost like she couldn't wait to be free of me, to be free of the responsibilities of a marriage. She thought the money would fill the void. But it wouldn't. I checked into a hotel the day I walked out. Not that I couldn't afford a nice apartment, but the hotel gave me space. It gave me time to think, and I needed time. I needed to figure out what to do next. She was the one who had thrown it all away, but I couldn't let her destroy everything we had worked for. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew that I had to be patient. I had to wait. Because I knew that sooner or later, Catherine was going to realize that the life she had imagined was a fantasy. That inheritance? It wasn't as simple as she thought. She was going to need a wake-up call, and when it came, I was going to be ready. Sure enough, 3 days later, I got the call. I was sitting in my hotel room, drinking black coffee, watching the world go by outside my window when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered on the second ring, already knowing who it was. Mr. Bennett. The voice on the other end was calm, but I could hear the professional distance in it. This is Jonathan Reed, legal counsel for the estate of Edward Sinclair. I believe we need to have a conversation. I let out a breath, the corner of my mouth lifting slightly. Right on schedule, I muttered to myself. The meeting was set up for the next morning. I wasn't surprised. Edward Sinclair was meticulous. He never did anything without thinking it through, especially when it came to money. I had expected him to put some kind of safeguard in place, some kind of trap for Catherine to fall into. But this was something else entirely. This was genius. Jonathan Reed's office was sleek, professional, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that screamed power. It was the kind of place where fortunes were made and destroyed with a single stroke of a pen. Reed greeted me with a tight smile, and without wasting any time, he slid a thick folder across the desk. "The conditions are ironclad," he said, his voice low but confident. Edward Sinclair was not a man who left anything to chance. The estate is indeed worth $495 million, but access to those funds is complicated. I leaned forward, curiosity piqued. How complicated? Reed flipped open the folder, scanning the pages before reading aloud. Catherine Sinclair must obtain full-time employment, maintain that employment for no less than 5 consecutive years, and complete an accredited financial management course. Only then will the trust be released in increments, subject to ongoing financial evaluations. I raised my eyebrows, my mind racing. And if she doesn't? Reed met my gaze, his expression unreadable. The entirety of the estate will be donated to charity. I let out a slow whistle, shaking my head. Edward Sinclair had never been one for second chances. He really did it, I muttered, mostly to myself. I almost felt sorry for Catherine, but not quite. Reed paused before sliding another document across the desk. This one had my name on it. Bold letters. Your portion of the estate. I stared at it for a long moment. My portion? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Reed nodded, his face giving nothing away. 25%. My mind raced. $123 million? Reed nodded again. Yes. I sat back in my chair, trying to process it. I hadn't expected this. Edward and I had never been close, but over the years, I had earned his respect. In his eyes I had demonstrated the values he had hoped to see in his daughter. He had always seen something in me that Catherine had never bothered to understand. And now, that respect had turned into a small fortune. Why? I asked, almost more to myself than to Reed. Reed shrugged slightly. Mr. Sinclair respected you. He believed you deserved better. The weight of those words hit me hard. Catherine, my ex-wife, had thought she was untouchable, and now she was about to fall into a trap of her own making. She had spent years dismissing me, belittling my work, my career, my ambitions. And now, in the end, she had lost everything. All because she never thought to ask the right questions. All because she never took the time to understand what was really happening behind the scenes. I leaned back, a smile tugging at my lips. Catherine thought she had won, but I knew better. I was about to come out on top, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Can you guess what happened next? Would she manage to keep her fortune, or would she lose it all? Comment 1 if you think she'll crawl back to me. Comment 2 if you think she'll find another way out. Let's see if you can predict the outcome as the tension builds. The next few days dragged on like a bad dream. I knew something was coming, knew that sooner or later, Catherine was going to realize she had made the biggest mistake of her life. But I hadn't anticipated how fast things would start to unravel for her. She thought she was sitting pretty, the money already in her hands, and her life was about to be everything she had ever dreamed of. I watched from a distance, almost with pity, as she went about her day, her world untouched by the storm brewing just beneath the surface. She didn't know what was coming, but I did. 3 days after I left the house, it started. I'd gotten used to the quiet hum of my hotel room, the soft tick of the clock on the wall and the faint sound of the city outside. It was the kind of place that made you feel anonymous, tucked away from the rest of the world. But that morning, as I sat with my coffee, staring out the window, I felt the first shift. The phone buzzed on the table in front of me, the number on the screen flashing a message I'd been waiting for. I let it ring twice before I picked up. Mr. Bennett. The voice on the other end was crisp, sharp, like someone who had done this 1,000 times. This is Jonathan Reed, legal counsel for the estate of Edward Sinclair. I believe we need to have a conversation. I couldn't help it. A smile tugged at my lips, and I exhaled, feeling that familiar rush of satisfaction. Right on schedule. I had expected Catherine to be the one calling, to be the one begging for help. But instead, here was the lawyer. I had known from the beginning that the moment she got her hands on that money, the truth would catch up with her. The meeting was set for later that afternoon. Reed was a professional, no-nonsense type. One knew he wouldn't waste my time. I arrived early, just to make sure I had the upper hand. The office was sleek, with its polished glass walls and minimalistic design. The kind of place where fortunes were built or destroyed in an instant. Jonathan Reed sat behind a massive desk, the kind that probably cost more than most people's homes. He didn't stand up when I entered. Didn't offer a handshake. Just gestured for me to take a seat, like we were about to conduct business, not discuss a personal matter. The conditions are ironclad, he said, opening a thick folder in front of him, his eyes scanning the pages. Edward Sinclair didn't leave anything to chance. The estate is worth $495 million, but it comes with stipulations. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the air. I leaned forward, my interest piqued. Stipulations? Reed looked up from the folder, his eyes meeting mine with a glint of something cold and calculated. Your ex-wife must obtain full-time employment. Maintain that employment for no less than 5 consecutive years, and complete an accredited financial management course. Only then will the trust be released in increments, subject to ongoing financial evaluations. I stared at him, my mind racing as the pieces clicked into place. Catherine had spent years complaining about her father, calling him every name in the book, because he wouldn't let her live the life she wanted. Now, here she was, thinking she had won the jackpot, only to find out that her father's legacy wasn't going to be a free ride. She was going to have to work. She was going to have to prove herself in ways she never thought possible. I let out a low laugh, shaking my head. And if she doesn't? Reed's expression didn't change. If she doesn't, the entire estate will be donated to charity. The words hit me harder than I thought they would. I had known Edward was ruthless. But this was genius. Catherine had spent her life avoiding responsibility, believing that she could float by on her father's money and my support. But Edward wasn't going to let her get away with it. He wasn't going to let her squander what he had spent his life building. Not without earning it. And you know this, how? I asked, still processing everything. Reed tapped the folder, his fingers lingering on the paper like he was savoring the moment. Edward was always 5 steps ahead of everyone in the room. He never did anything without a plan. I couldn't help but admire the old man. He had known exactly how to deal with Catherine. He had given her just enough rope to hang herself with. And now, the rope was tightening. You should know, Reed added, almost casually, the conditions for you are different. He slid another document across the table. I stared at it for a moment before picking it up. My name was written in bold letters across the top. I flipped it open, scanning the words. You're entitled to 25% of the estate, Reed said, his voice even, almost clinical. $123 million. I couldn't believe it. Edward had never been warm toward me. He'd never been easy to please. But he respected me. He respected the way I had worked for everything I had, the way I had supported his daughter, even when she couldn't see it. And now, in the end, it was me, not Catherine, who would benefit from his legacy. I leaned back in my chair, taking in the news. I wasn't sure if I was more surprised by the amount of money, or by the fact that Edward had done something for me. Something that Catherine would never see coming. She thought she had it all, but now? Now, she was about to learn what real responsibility felt like. I didn't expect this, I said, my voice low, almost to myself. I didn't think he'd leave me anything. Reed's lips twitched, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Mr. Sinclair believed you deserved better. He respected your integrity. And he didn't think Catherine had earned it. I let out a breath, my mind racing. So, what happens now? Reed pushed the folder toward me, the next phase of the plan unfolding before my eyes. Now, you prepare for the consequences. You make sure Catherine faces the reality of her situation. You make sure she understands that this money doesn't come without a price. I stood up, ready to leave. But as I turned to walk out of the office, something inside me stirred. I knew Catherine. I knew her pride. I knew her sense of entitlement. And I knew that when the truth hit her, when she realized that she wasn't going to get the money without working for it, she was going to panic. And when she panicked, she was going to come crawling back. And when she did, I was going to be there. Ready. I knew it wouldn't take long for Catherine to realize that the world didn't revolve around her. The moment the reality of her father's will hit her, I was ready for it. She had been too sure of herself, for too long too convinced that she could just coast through life without ever facing any consequences. She thought that once her father passed, everything would be handed to her on a silver platter. She had it all figured out, didn't she? Or so she thought. I watched from a distance as the cracks in her perfect little world began to widen. Slowly at first, then with a speed that was almost satisfying to witness. The first call came a few days after my meeting with Reed. Catherine had reached out. She wasn't calling to apologize, or to beg me to come back. No, that wasn't her style. She was still Catherine Sinclair, the woman who had always gotten what she wanted, no matter the cost. She wasn't going to admit that she had made a mistake. But what I heard in her voice when she spoke was unmistakable desperation. It was faint at first, hidden beneath her usual condescending tone, but it was there. And it was enough to make me smile. Matthew, she said, her voice clipped, like she was trying to sound in control. But I knew better. We need to talk. I had to fight back the urge to laugh. Talk? About what? I leaned back in my chair, watching the traffic outside my hotel window. I think we've said everything that needed to be said. She didn't respond right away. I could practically hear her taking a deep breath, gathering her thoughts, trying to figure out how to navigate this conversation without giving away too much. But I wasn't fooled. I knew exactly what was going on. She had gotten a taste of the reality that had been waiting for her all along. The inheritance wasn't just a free pass. It came with conditions she had never bothered to read. I could hear the faintest tremor in her voice when she spoke again. I need your help, Matthew, she said, her tone softening, just a little. I'm having trouble finding a job. That was it. The moment the mask started to slip. She wasn't the powerful, confident woman who had walked out on me so easily. No, now she was just a woman who had made a huge mistake and was realizing that she couldn't fix it on her own. Help? I said, my voice steady. But there was a certain satisfaction bubbling up inside me. You mean you want me to bail you out? She didn't answer right away, but I could hear the frustration building on the other end of the line. I need support while I get back on my feet, she said. Her words rushed, like she was trying to get them out before I could cut her off. Just something to help me through this transition. I exhaled slowly, leaning forward in my chair. Catherine, you don't get it, do you? I said, my voice low. This isn't some little mistake you made. You've spent your entire life thinking the world owed you something. You've never had to work for a damn thing in your life. And now you want me to come in and fix it? I could hear her breathing on the other end, her frustration growing. You don't understand, Matthew, she snapped. I've always had everything handed to me. I don't know how to do this on my own. There it was. The admission she couldn't quite hide. The truth she had been running from. No, Catherine, you don't understand, I said, my voice even, but filled with a quiet intensity. You spent your entire life relying on other people to make things happen for you. Your father, me. But now you're on your own, and it's time you learned that the world doesn't owe you anything. Not anymore. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could tell she was processing it, probably trying to figure out how to get me to help her. But the thing was, I didn't owe her a damn thing. Not anymore. You're really going to do this, aren't you? She asked, her voice quieter now, but still sharp. You're just going to sit there and act like you don't care? I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window. What do you want me to say, Catherine? I asked, my voice calm but firm. I'm not going to fix your problems. I'm not going to clean up your mess. You've made your choices, and now you have to live with them. The words felt good coming out. I'd spent so long watching her take advantage of me, watching her throw away everything we had for the illusion of a better life. And now, for the first time, I wasn't the one picking up the pieces. I don't know what else to do, Matthew, she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. Please, just, help me. I shook my head, almost feeling sorry for her. Help yourself, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. That's the only person who can fix this now. You've spent your whole life looking for someone to rescue you. But that's not happening anymore. You're on your own. I paused for a moment, letting the silence stretch between us. Good luck, Catherine, I added, before hanging up. I set the phone down and stared at the empty space in front of me. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something pity, maybe. But it was quickly replaced by the realization that I wasn't just watching her fall apart. I was watching her face the consequences of a lifetime of entitlement. She had always thought she could outrun responsibility. She had always thought she could manipulate people into getting what she wanted. But now, she was going to learn that the world didn't care about her name, her money, or her privilege. The rules had changed. And it was too late for her to do anything about it. A few weeks passed, and it wasn't until I saw Catherine's face again that I realized how much she had underestimated everything. I knew I shouldn't be enjoying this. I should have been angry, maybe a little more heartbroken. But as I watched her struggle, watched the cracks in her perfect life begin to show, I couldn't help but feel vindicated. This was her doing. All of it. She had brought herself to this point by choosing the easy way out. By dismissing me, by assuming that all her problems could be solved with a stack of cash. But now, she was realizing the hard way that money doesn't solve everything. Her first attempt to find a job came with the kind of enthusiasm that only someone who had never had to work a day in their life could have. It didn't take long for her to figure out that the job market wasn't interested in her last name or her father's legacy. It wasn't even interested in her designer clothes or her polished smile. She was too overqualified, too out of touch with what it really meant to work. Her resume was a joke, an endless list of social events and personal projects that didn't mean a damn thing in the real world. But she didn't get it. She never understood how people like me had made our way in the world. It wasn't about what you could buy or who you knew. It was about hard work, grit, something she had never been taught. I watched as she called me again. This time, her voice was different. Less confident. More desperate. Matthew, she said, her tone tight, like she was trying to keep it together. I need your help. I can't find anything. I couldn't believe she was actually asking for my help. After everything that had happened, after she had thrown me out like I was nothing, now she was reaching out? For a moment, I almost laughed. You think I'm going to fix this for you? I asked, my voice even. You think I'm going to step in and make everything right? There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, hear the panic in her chest, as she realized that there was no easy way out this time. Matthew, please, she said, her voice cracking. I've tried everything. I can't do this on my own. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. You're right, you can't do this on your own. And you're not going to get my help, I said, the words slipping out with more force than I meant. This is your mess, Catherine. You made it. Now you have to clean it up. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could almost see her standing there, her hand shaking as she clutched the phone. But I wasn't going to give in, not this time. You can't just bail me out, I continued. You've spent your whole life running from responsibility. From anything that required you to work, to struggle. And now, here you are, with nothing. No money, no support. You're going to have to figure it out, Catherine. You're on your own now. I hung up before she could say another word, not because I didn't want to listen, but because I knew there was nothing left to say. She had made her choice. She had chosen the easy path, the path of entitlement and privilege. And now, she was paying the price. She thought that money would make everything better, that it would solve all her problems, that the inheritance would be her ticket to freedom. But she never counted on one thing: the rules. The conditions her father had set up were unforgiving, and they didn't care about her pedigree. They didn't care that she had been spoiled, that she had spent her life being handed everything she ever wanted. No, these rules were meant to break her down. And that was exactly what was happening. She was crumbling. Slowly, painfully, she was realizing that she couldn't buy her way out of this. No amount of money could erase the reality that she wasn't qualified to do anything real. She had no experience, no skills, no knowledge of what it took to actually work for a living. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I just felt a cold sense of inevitability. Catherine had made her bed. And now she was going to have to lie in it. The calls came in one after another, each one more desperate than the last. But I didn't pick up. I didn't need to. I knew what was coming. I knew that sooner or later, she would come crawling back. And when she did, I was going to be ready. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about watching her learn a lesson she should have learned a long time ago. You can't live off other people forever. Eventually, the world catches up to you. And when it does, there's no one left to save you. It didn't take long for Catherine to hit rock bottom. I could almost hear her pride shattering over the phone as I hung up on her again. This time, though, it wasn't just the empty threats. It wasn't just the manipulation or the desperation. No, this time, she had no cards left to play. After a few days of her calling and leaving me messages, I finally heard the sound of defeat in her voice. She didn't say it directly, but I could hear it loud and clear. She was broken, and the realization hit her like a freight train. There was no going back now. It was strange, almost surreal, watching her crumble from a distance. I'd spent years taking the back seat, trying to keep our relationship together, picking up the pieces every time she broke something. But now it was her turn to face the consequences. And let me tell you, they were coming fast. I was sitting in my small apartment, nursing a cold beer, when the phone buzzed again. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. Catherine's name flashed up, but this time, there was something different about the message. Something that told me she had finally realized she wasn't going to win this time. I didn't answer immediately. I knew it would be another one of her rehearsed pleas, but I could almost hear the fear in her voice already. I picked up the phone and listened to the voicemail she left. "Matthew, please. I need your help. I've tried everything. I can't get anyone to hire me. I don't know what to do anymore. Please, just listen. Call me back. Please." The desperation was palpable, and for a second, I felt a flash of something: pity? Sympathy? But then it faded. This was the moment she'd been avoiding her whole life. The moment she couldn't run from anymore. This wasn't about what she could buy, or how she could manipulate people with her charm. This was real life, and she was getting hit with it hard. The real world didn't care about her last name. It didn't care how many expensive dresses she owned or how many high society parties she'd attended. All that mattered now was whether she could hold down a job, and whether she could prove she had what it took to earn the inheritance. It wasn't the first time she had relied on other people for her success, but it was the first time it wasn't going to work. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat there, processing the situation. She had been living in a bubble for so long, coasting by on her beauty, her father's money, and my support. But now, all that was gone. She had always belittled me for working so hard, for being ordinary, and here she was, pleading for help because she couldn't even hold down a regular job. The irony was delicious. She had never understood what it took to build something real, to fight for what you wanted. And now, she was staring down the harsh reality that life didn't give a damn about how rich or pretty you were. It was brutal, but it was the truth. I wasn't going to play the hero this time. I wasn't going to swoop in and fix everything like I always had. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. The next few days were a slow burn. I watched her struggle from a distance, as her attempts to get a job fell flat. Rejection after rejection, call after call, all leading to the same dead end. She had no real work experience. No skills. Nothing that could prove she was anything more than a spoiled rich girl, who had no idea how to get her hands dirty. Her pride wouldn't let her back down, though. She kept applying for jobs, lower tier positions she would have laughed at before. Receptionist jobs. Office assistants or retail positions. But none of it worked. I knew it wouldn't. Because Catherine Sinclair wasn't built for that life. She had spent her whole life avoiding responsibility, and now, she was paying the price. I started getting reports from mutual acquaintances, little whispers that made their way back to me about how she was spending her days now. No more shopping sprees. No more high-end lunches. No more designer dresses. It was a sad picture, really. She was trying so hard to pretend everything was fine, but it was obvious to anyone who looked that she was unraveling. Her old friends were gone, disappearing as quickly as the money she had once flaunted. I could almost hear her desperation in every message she sent, every email she sent begging for help. But I wasn't going to fall for it. I had already been down this road with her too many times. And then came the turning point, the one that I had been waiting for. Catherine finally realized that there was no easy way out. She couldn't use me. She couldn't manipulate the situation the way she used to. She was on her own, and she didn't know how to handle it. It was almost painful to watch. She had everything handed to her for so long, and now, for the first time, she had to learn what it meant to work for something, to fight for it. But she couldn't do it. Not on her own. She didn't have the resilience, the grit, the understanding that things take time. She was a stranger to hard work, and it showed. One evening, after yet another failed interview, I saw her again. Not in person, but through a social media post. A picture of her standing in front of a coffee shop, trying to look like she had it all together. But it was the look in her eyes, the way she was holding herself that told the real story. She was broken. She had nothing left. And that's when I knew it was over. She was done. And she knew it. She could try to fight it all she wanted, but she would never be able to go back to the life she once had. She had no safety net anymore. No one to lean on. It was just her now. And it was too late for her to change that. I didn't reach out to her again. I didn't need to. The silence between us spoke louder than any words ever could. It was her battle to fight now. And for the first time, I was content to let her figure it out on her own. I had watched her for too long, watched her waste everything I had given her, watched her walk all over me. And I had had enough. The ball was in her court now, and I wasn't going to be the one to catch it. It was only a matter of time before Catherine reached out to me again. I could feel the inevitability of it hanging in the air, thick with the kind of tension you get right before a storm breaks. The desperation in her voice the last time she called it wasn't something you could ignore. But this time, it wasn't the usual empty promises or manipulation. No, this time, it was something different. She had hit rock bottom, and she was finally starting to realize what that meant. I'd been preparing for it, but the call still caught me off guard. It came late in the evening, when the city outside my apartment was quiet. The hum of traffic a soft backdrop to the stillness in my living room. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and when I saw her name on the screen, I took a deep breath. I didn't need to answer right away, but I knew it wasn't going to be some mindless check-in. She wasn't going to ask for my help. Not this time. This was the moment when everything changed for her. I swiped to answer, my finger lingering on the screen for just a moment, steeling myself for what I knew was coming. "Matthew," she said, her voice small, almost fragile. "I need to talk to you." I let out a breath, leaning back in my chair, studying the way the light from the streetlights outside flickered against the walls. "What is it, Catherine?" I said, keeping my tone neutral, detached. "I don't have anything more to say. I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice shaky now, like she was teetering on the edge of breaking. "I've tried everything, and it's just not working. I can't find a job. I don't know how to fix this." There it was. The raw honesty that had been absent for so long. The woman who had once scoffed at the idea of doing any kind of real work, the one who had prided herself on living a life of privilege and luxury, was finally facing the harsh reality that she couldn't coast forever. I could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the weight of everything finally catching up with her. And as much as I should have felt some sympathy, I didn't. It was too late for that. This was the moment she had to face the consequences of every choice she had made. And for the first time, she wasn't going to have anyone to save her. "I've been applying to everything," she continued, the words coming faster now, almost spilling out. "Retail, Receptionist jobs. I can't even get a call back. What do I do, Matthew? I can't do this on my own. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting her words sink in. Part of me wanted to say something, anything that would make her realize how far she'd fallen. Part of me wanted to remind her of how many times she had taken me for granted. But I didn't. Instead, I just listened. Let her talk. Let her process the reality of what she was facing. Catherine, I said, my voice calm, even, but there was a firmness to it now. You've spent your whole life running from responsibility, thinking that everything would always be handed to you. But this is your mess. You made it. And now, you're the one who has to clean it up. She didn't respond right away, and for a brief moment, I thought the call had ended. But then, I heard the faintest tremor in her voice. I don't know how, she whispered. That was the part that hit me. The vulnerability in her voice. I hadn't heard that side of her in years. She wasn't the same woman who had walked out on me with a smirk on her face, convinced she had won. No, this was different. She was finally facing something she had spent her entire life avoiding. The truth. The truth that money, privilege, and status didn't mean a damn thing if you didn't know how to survive without them. You have to figure it out, Catherine, I said, my tone still steady, but there was a finality to it now. You've lived a life where you never had to work for anything. Now you have to do the hard work, the kind of work you've never had to do before. It's not easy, and it's not going to be glamorous. But it's the only way forward. She was silent for a long time, and I could feel her taking it in. I could hear the way her breath had steadied, the way she was thinking about what I had said. I didn't expect her to get it right away. She'd never been one to listen, not really. But this was different. She had no choice now but to listen. I'll figure it out, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. But there was something different in her tone now, something I hadn't heard before. A kind of resignation. A kind of acceptance. She didn't want to face it, but she had no other choice. I don't know how, but I will. It wasn't much, but it was something. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something inside me. Maybe it was pity. Or maybe it was just that damn satisfaction I had been holding onto for so long. She wasn't going to get a free pass anymore. And that's when I knew it was done. She was done. And I was done. I hung up the phone, set it down on the table, and let the silence fill the room. Catherine wasn't the same woman I had married. She wasn't the same woman I had spent years trying to protect, trying to save. No, now she was something else, a person who had to learn the hard way that nothing in life comes free. And as much as I had wanted to be there for her, to be the one she leaned on, I knew I couldn't. She had to face this on her own. But I couldn't help but wonder how long would it take before she realized that she wasn't going to be able to keep up the charade anymore. How long would it take before she finally admitted to herself that the life she thought she deserved was nothing more than a fantasy? That was the real question. And I had all the time in the world to find out. The days that followed felt like a slow march toward inevitable confrontation. I had prepared myself for this, but it still hit me like a freight train when it finally came. Catherine, once so sure of herself, was completely undone. She couldn't hide it anymore. Her messages, once filled with snide remarks and cutting sarcasm, now felt desperate. She reached out to me again, and this time, I knew it wasn't a game. It wasn't her trying to manipulate or make me feel guilty. She was broken, and there was something raw in her voice that I couldn't ignore, even if I wanted to. I was sitting on my couch, trying to zone out and forget the mess my life had become, when my phone buzzed again. Her name flashed across the screen, and for a split second, I thought about letting it go to voicemail. But then, something made me pick up. Maybe it was the curiosity. Or maybe it was the fact that I couldn't get the image of her broken, desperate, unraveling out of my head. I pressed the phone to my ear. Matthew. Her voice was different this time, so different from the confident, self-assured woman who had walked out on me just weeks before. She sounded small, vulnerable. I could almost hear her trembling. I don't know what to do anymore. I leaned back, setting the beer I had been drinking down on the coffee table, my eyes fixed on the empty space ahead of me. She was finally admitting defeat. She had been trying to keep up this charade for so long, pretending like she could handle it. Pretending like the life she had built was still within her grasp. But I knew better. I had been watching her, and I had seen the cracks forming long before she had ever acknowledged them. What are you saying, Catherine? I asked, my voice even, my heart pounding as I waited for her next words. You didn't think this was going to catch up with you eventually? There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I could hear her breathing, shaky but steady. I didn't want to admit it, she said. Her words hanging in the air. But I can't do it, Matthew. I've tried. I've tried so hard to fix everything, but I can't. I can't even get a damn job. The words hit me, but not in the way I expected. I thought I'd feel satisfaction, maybe even a little bit of smugness. But there was none of that. Instead, I felt something. A strange sense of pity, mixed with something darker, more bitter. She had done this to herself. She had spent years looking down on people like me. People who worked hard for what they had. People who weren't born with a silver spoon in their mouth. And now here she was utterly helpless, unable to get anything she wanted without the safety net she had so easily discarded. I don't know what to tell you, I said, my voice growing colder, more detached. You've spent your whole life depending on other people. Me, your father, your money. Now, it's just you, Catherine. And the truth is, you don't know how to survive without any of that. I heard her let out a soft sob on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought about hanging up. But then, something stopped me. I had been the one to bail her out too many times. I had been the one to pick up the pieces of her mistakes. But this time, she had to face it. She had to learn that life wasn't going to hand her anything anymore. You can't fix this, Catherine, I said, my voice steady, but the weight of it was heavy in the room. You've burned through all your chances. You thought you could just live off your father's fortune, live off my work, my sacrifices. But now you have to figure it out. You have to earn your place. No one is going to hand you anything anymore. She was quiet for a long time, and I wondered if she was even listening to me anymore. But then, finally, she spoke. Her voice was softer now, like she was talking to herself more than to me. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be normal. I've never had to work for anything. I let out a sigh, rubbing my hand across my face. And now you have to learn, I said, almost gentler this time. You've had everything handed to you for so long, but now? You're going to have to earn it. You can't keep running away from reality. You've tried, but it's catching up with you. For a moment, there was silence. I waited, wondering what she would say. Would she cry? Would she beg for help? But she didn't. Instead, I heard her breathe deeply, like she was gathering the last bit of strength she had left. I'll figure it out, she said quietly, but there was a strength in her voice now. I'll find a way. I didn't know if I believed her. Part of me wanted to say something encouraging, wanted to tell her that she would be okay, that she could make it. But the truth was, I wasn't sure. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with a few words of encouragement. This was about survival. This was about proving that you were more than just your last name, more than the money you had inherited, or the life you thought you were entitled to. She had to face that reality. And if she didn't, she would drown in it. I exhaled slowly. Good luck, Catherine, I said, not out of malice, but because it was the only thing left to say. I mean it, you're going to need it. I hung up the phone, the weight of the conversation sinking in. She was still the same woman I had loved once, but she was also someone else now. Someone who had to face the consequences of everything she had taken for granted. And I was done being the one to pick up the pieces. It was hard to ignore the weight of the situation anymore. For so long, I had watched Catherine float through life, assuming things would always be handed to her, that she would never have to really work for anything, that people like me were always going to pick up the pieces. But now, after everything, she was seeing the cracks in her perfect little world start to widen. And I couldn't help but watch from the sidelines as it all came crashing down. In a way, it was almost satisfying, but the reality of it hit harder than I expected. The truth had finally caught up with her, and she wasn't the person she used to be. Not even close. It had been a few weeks since our last conversation, and I was trying to move on, to focus on the next steps in my own life. I had a new place, nothing fancy, but it was mine. A small apartment in the heart of the city where I could finally breathe, where I didn't have to look over my shoulder and wonder when the next phone call would come. I kept to myself, letting the world pass by as I focused on work, on rebuilding a sense of peace in my life. And for the most part, things were going well. I felt like I was finally finding my footing again. even though I knew Catherine was still struggling. I couldn't escape the feeling that somehow, our lives would intertwine again. One night, I was sitting at my kitchen table, scrolling through emails, when the phone buzzed. I looked down, expecting it to be a colleague or maybe just a spam call. But no, it was Catherine. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should pick it up, if I should just let it go to voicemail. I didn't know what she could possibly want after everything that had happened. But then, curiosity got the better of me. I answered the call. Matthew, her voice came through, shaky but controlled, as if she was trying to keep it together. I need to talk to you. I leaned back in my chair, my hands running through my hair. Part of me didn't want to listen, didn't want to give her any more of my time, but I couldn't help myself. The truth was, I was curious. I was curious about what she had to say, about how much lower she could go. I didn't respond right away. Just waited for her to fill the silence. Please, she continued. I've made a mess of everything. I just don't know how to fix it. There it was. The desperation in her voice was impossible to ignore. She wasn't the Catherine I had known, the cold, calculating woman who had left me without a second thought. This was someone else. Someone who had finally seen how far she had fallen, and it felt like the floor was beneath her feet, slipping away. For the first time, she was real, raw, and exposed. And I was left with a choice. I could respond with anger, with bitterness, or I could give her a taste of reality. The same one I had been feeding myself for months. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice steady, but there was a steeliness behind it now. You think I'm just going to fix this for you? You think I'm going to swoop in and save you from this mess? I'm not asking you to save me, she said quickly, the words tumbling out. I'm not asking for help like that. I just need to hear it from you. I need to know if there's any way back. I've messed up, Matthew, and I don't know how to start over. I've lost everything. There it was. Her admission. The realization that she couldn't get everything handed to her anymore. That her money, her name, her status, they didn't mean a damn thing in the real world. The world that had always given her what she wanted was no longer in her control. She had no safety net left to fall back on. No father's money, no man to pick up the pieces. The walls were closing in on her, and she couldn't escape. I sat there, staring at the phone, letting her words sink in. For a second, I considered telling her it wasn't my problem anymore. That I had done enough, that it was time for her to figure it out on her own. But then, something else surfaced inside me, a mixture of sympathy and anger. Anger, because she had never learned. She had spent her life being handed everything she ever wanted, and now she was faced with the consequences of that. But sympathy too, because for the first time, she was alone. And I knew that feeling all too well. I don't think you understand, I finally said, my voice steady. This isn't something you can just fix with a few words. You're not going to magically get everything back. You can't go back to the way things were. What you want doesn't exist anymore. You're going to have to rebuild from the ground up, Catherine. And it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be glamorous. It's going to be hard work, and I don't know if you're ready for that. I know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I've made mistakes. I know I can't undo everything. But I just need a chance to prove that I can change. That I can do this. The vulnerability in her voice was something I hadn't heard in a long time. It made me pause, made me rethink everything for a second. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that she could change. That she could find a way to redeem herself. But deep down, I knew better. People don't change overnight. And Catherine, for all her beauty and charm, had never understood the real work it takes to succeed. She had always relied on others, and now, she had no one left. I'm not going to make it easy for you, I said, my words sharp, but not unkind. This is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. But if you're serious about changing, then you need to start with one thing. Stop looking for someone to save you. Stop expecting the world to give you what you want. Start working for it. Start earning it. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find your way back. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing, slow and deliberate, like she was processing everything I had just said. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just talking to her anymore. I was talking to myself too. I had spent so much time wondering if she would ever get it. Wondering if she would ever realize that the life she had been living wasn't sustainable. And now, finally, she was facing it. I wasn't going to fix her mistakes. I wasn't going to pick up the pieces this time. It was up to her to decide what came next. I'll try, she said quietly. I'll try to change. I didn't respond right away. What could I say to that? Words were meaningless at this point. The only thing that mattered now was what she did. It wasn't about promises or apologies. It was about action. And I didn't know if she had it in her. I hope you do, I said, my voice low. Because this is your last chance, Catherine. There's no coming back from this, if you don't. I hung up the phone and sat back, letting the silence settle around me. I couldn't change her. I couldn't fix her. But I could walk away and let her figure it out on her own. I wasn't the person who had the power to save her anymore. That was something she had to realize for herself. As the days passed, I kept my distance, watching from the sidelines as Catherine continued her struggle. It wasn't easy for her. I could tell. She was fighting against everything she had ever known. Fighting against her own sense of entitlement. And that was a battle I wasn't sure she could win. But it wasn't my fight anymore. I had done what I could. Now, it was time for her to decide whether or not she was going to make it. And there it was, the moment everything changed. But here's the question: after all the tricks, the lies, and the manipulation, was I right to leave her to face the consequences? What do you think? Was she truly a victim of her own actions? Or did she deserve everything that came her way? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and share if you think others need to hear this powerful lesson on entitlement and hard work. The lesson here is simple: nothing in life is handed to you. You have to work for it. Life doesn't owe you anything, no matter how much you think you deserve it. In America, hard work, responsibility, and resilience are what build true success. If you rely on others to lift you up, eventually, you'll fall. Don't expect the world to hand you a free pass. Stand up, work hard, and take responsibility for your actions. That's the only way to truly succeed.